Tonight on Localite, Sarah Munro pieces together the many unique tales, innovations, and tribulations that led to the remarkable art and craftsmanship found at Timberline Lodge. Sarah's passion for the artisan work done on this WPA gem is palpable. That's all coming up on Localite.
Sarah, thank you for coming out from Portland and sitting here and telling us a bit about your story and some of the things that you're really pretty much an expert on, like Timberline Lodge. But you grew up in Portland.
That's right.
And then kind of went off to school, and then how did you end up back in Portland, and where did the love for Timberline come in? That's kind of a broad question, but...
Well, I grew up in Portland. My dad had grown up in Portland. He was a doctor. And in fact, when he decided to practice medicine in Portland before I was born, he considered most seriously coming to the Dalles. He had a very good friend who was a doctor here, Dr. Vogt, who's since deceased, but he very nearly came to the Dalles to set up his practice.
Really?
He did, yes. And instead he decided, he and my mother decided to buy a house in Portland, and he went into practice there. So I grew up in Portland. Then I went away to college, to Pitzer College in Southern California, and I majored in anthropology and art history. And I went to Berkeley for graduate school to get my master's in folklore, which was a subdivision of, or it was a program within the anthropology department at Berkeley. And I developed there a pretty keen interest in talking to people, interviewing people, collecting folklore was part of the curriculum, of course, and I always had enjoyed stories and learning about people's heritage. So I think maybe it was kind of a natural thing to get to be interested in Timberline Lodge history when I did. That came about because in 1975 I was a member of a group in Portland called the Junior League, and they had just formed a nonprofit organization, Friends of Timberline, to help conserve and restore the lodge. And there's a story about that, which I'll tell you in a minute, but just to continue with how I became involved. Someone on the board of Friends of Timberline came to the Junior League to ask if there was a committee of women who would be interested to help collect history from some of the original builders and craftspeople and artists who at that time, there were quite a few still living. And I was just serendipitously happened to be at the board meeting where this announcement was made asking for people who were interested to volunteer, and I volunteered right away because it was really close to my interests and it just really appealed to me.
Yeah.
Also, the woman who was one of the founding members of Friends of Timberline was a retired curator at the Portland Art Museum, Rachel Griffin. And I had volunteered one summer at the Art Museum. I was very fond of Rachel and just leaped at the opportunity to work on a committee that she was involved with.
Okay. So that was in 75?
That was in 1975.
Wow. And did you know much about Timberline prior to joining? Did you say the group was Friends of Timberline Lodge?
Yes, that's right. No, I did not. I had skied at Timberline as a child, but not a lot. And of course, we were outside the lodge, and the lodge at that time, there was no day lodge, so going into the lodge was kind of a bracing experience where you just went in to use the facilities and get something to eat because it was so crowded at that time. It wasn't really a pleasant experience. So
really?
Yeah, so it wasn't until I was involved with Friends of Timberline that I developed a real love for this fabulous building.
Yeah. And Friends of Timberline is still in existence?
Yes, it is.
And were you the president at one point or something, or you are the president?
No, in fact, I'm not really on the board right now, but I have kind of been called the historian.
Well, you wrote a book about it.
Yes. And
we'll talk a bit more about your book too in the next segment. But when did you decide, I'm going to write a book about this place?
That kind of came with this involvement with Friends of Timberline. The committee collected information for about a year. They went out of existence. The committee stopped. They completed their job.
Okay.
I kept on. And another woman on the committee went on to the board, Carol Zell, went on to the board of Friends of Timberline. And then I kept on working with Rachel Griffin. One of the things that they had wanted to do, that Friends of Timberline wanted to do early on, was to preserve the artwork, do some conservation work. They also did not know what in the lodge was original. And so they wanted to conduct an inventory. And this,
how was that done?
well, that was how I really got involved with Friends of Timberline and with the lodge. There had been an inventory of the original furnishings at the time the lodge was completed in 1938, and no inventory since. The Forest Service administers the building, and they were very interested to have an inventory, and Friends of Timberline wanted to get this inventory of original artwork and furniture to see what was still there. So I would just go up on a regular basis and go around taking notes. I have to say I probably wasn't the most systematic about it. And then I also joined with someone who was an employee of the Forest Service, and he would mark things. We put these little tags on a lot of the furniture, and finished the first complete inventory that had been done in over 35 years, I guess.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and this was one of the goals, the initial goals of the Friends, and we put it together in a catalog, and we wrote 3 chapters. Rachel wrote a chapter on the restoration efforts of Friends of Timberline. I wrote a chapter on construction, and a woman who had completed her PhD dissertation on the construction of the lodge, Jean Weir, who at that time was teaching at Oregon State, did a chapter on the craft work and art.
Wow. Well, good. Well, we'll keep talking about this when we come back. Take a quick break. Be right back. Stay with us. Sarah Munro is here to talk about Timberline Lodge and her book. Be right back.
Next,
She also, in the course of this conversation, somehow complained to Dick that the curtains in her room were all torn. So he took them down and gave them to her to take home to repair.
Oh, yeah?
And she told us much later, I'm really not a seamstress, but she repaired them and sent them back to the lodge.